Hello, everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Some Oklahoma horse owners have spotted blister beetles in their barns and around their pastures. We'll have more for you coming up a little bit later in the show. But first, we're talking about Oklahoma's cotton crop. Here's SUNUP's Dave Deacon and our Extension cotton specialist, Dr. Seth Byrd.
Here we are in July and cotton is growing across the state. Seth, it's kind of popping up in non-traditional cotton areas across the state, and we've seen that happen over the past couple of years. How does the crop look?
Overall, it looks pretty good. You know, we usually have this planting window through the entire month of May, and this year you really saw it kind of abbreviated. You saw a lot of cotton go in early May. I think a lot of our Panhandle region, when you talk about the sort of the non-traditional or newer areas, most of the Panhandle region probably went in that early May time period. Some of the Southwest and even the West Central portions, sort of our more traditional areas, had started in early May, and then we got that pretty solid rain in the middle of the month, and that pushed some folks off and came back to planting in late May. So we kind of have these two real big windows of planting that we have this year. USDA put us at 640,000 acres. I think we're a little under that, but we're still probably around the 600,000 mark, and that puts us easily third in the nation in planted acres. And I think that the majority of those in our state look fairly good now, if not better. So overall, it's pretty good, but we have certainly lost some acres.
Are we seeing any pressure with the insects, with any pests at all?
We had some thrips pressure early on, and that's something that we expect in certain areas. And you know, between seed treatments and folks scouting and getting some oversprays out, we can usually, if we're timely, we can usually be pretty good about controlling thrips and minimizing their damage. And I think for the most part, we've done that this year. Now, as we're moving into flowering, most of the state's probably gonna be flowering this week or by the end of next. We're gonna start getting to our stink bug pest and our worm complex, or our caterpillars. So stink bugs, you know, obviously need to scout for those. Tobacco budworm is usually something that we have had successfully controlled with our BT traits. Corn earworm, or a lot of folks will refer to it as the bowworm, that's been something that's been a little more touch and go. We've seen a lot of weakness with our 2-gene BT traits. Most Oklahomans probably got a 3-gene trait planted, but even still, we have seen some other areas of the cotton belt who have had issues with controlling or getting total control of that species with even 3-gene BT traits. So as we move into this part of the season, continuing to scout is going to be, you know, just as important as it was early to make sure we control those pests, especially with a lot of our acres being in a situation where yield potential is pretty good.
Moving forward, we're getting into the need for moisture, for heat units. Just kind of paint a broad picture of that timeline for when we need those heat or when the cotton plant needs the heat units, because in the past years we've needed them. Clouds have rolled in, we've got rain whenever we needed that boost in that.
Yeah, so I mean, so from here on out, you know, most of our state is going to be able to put on effective flowers, and I mean a flower that will become a harvestable, mature boll between, you know, this week and mid-August. In some areas it may be a little earlier, in a lot of areas it's going to be a little later. So we really need another, you know, 6 to 7 weeks of favorable conditions at least. Really, we could use it throughout the mid-September. I've seen probably some of the best dryland cotton this year that I've ever seen in Oklahoma or otherwise. It's just, we've had some really good looking dryland cotton. We do a lot of on-farm dryland variety trials with our producers, and to be a dryland cotton grower, you got to have a different sort of way about it anyway. And so we work with some really good growers, and these folks have got tremendous stands of cotton this year. So I really hope we can keep capturing some of these rains, because the potential in those fields right now is great. And if we could just meet, you know, 90%, 80% of it, we're gonna have a pretty good crop.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Seth Byrd, Extension Cotton Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet weather report. I'm Wes Lee. If you think it's been hot lately, just wait. As the old saying goes, you ain't seen nothing yet. Forecast heat for Saturday afternoon has us seeing some of the hottest temperatures encountered in a long time. Triple-digit heat is likely for a vast majority of the state. One of our most heat-tolerant crops in the state is cotton. In areas where moisture is adequate, mainly irrigated fields, the cotton crop is looking pretty good. One way to measure the heat as it relates to a specific crop is with degree days. The degree days for cotton at 3 locations are shown in this chart. The blue bars are degree days for Altus, Hinton, and Hooker. The orange bars are the 5-year average for those locations. This assumes a planting date of May 15th and run through July 7th. It shows this year's accumulation is very similar to the 5-year average in the south at Altus and at the middle of the state at Hinton. At Hooker in the Panhandle, it is running a little ahead of average. Expect degree days to climb rapidly over the next few weeks. The forecast is showing a much higher than normal chance of extreme temperatures as seen in red on this map for next week. Gary is up next talking about the ever-expanding drought picture in Oklahoma.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we've had some pretty decent rains, at least over parts of the state over the last couple of weeks. How's it impacted the drought? Let's take a look at the new map and see what we have. Well, as is often the case in Oklahoma with the drought impacts that we're seeing, it's often 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and that's what we're looking at on the new map. We do still have severe drought across much of the western panhandle, and then we have a new area, a larger area of moderate drought that covers much of the northeastern quarter of the state. So again, when we talk about improvements, I'm afraid it was 1 step forward and then 2 steps back. So looking at those rains over the last couple of weeks, we do see lots of generous rains scattered here and there. Unfortunately, they are very scattered. So it really looks like Mother Nature just sort of threw up on this map. So some good rains in some places. The Panhandle got some decent rains, which is why we had some improvements there. And eastern Oklahoma got some decent rains over the last couple of weeks. The picture becomes a little bit more clear if we go out to the 90-day time frame with this Mesonet rainfall map. We see much of the northwestern half of the state, basically 6 inches or less, and we get into certain parts of that area, like in Blaine, Kingfisher County, we get down to around 5 inches, less than 4 inches in Dewey County. Then out in the Panhandle, of course, it's less than 4 inches. And it looks like that pattern might stick with us. And now we see the outlook for next week from the Climate Prediction Center. Once again, greatly increased odds of below normal precipitation over that 6-day period. So certainly not good news there. As I've said before, having a drought going into the summer months is not a good situation, especially into July and August. But hopefully we can get some rain back in here and start to tamp that drought down a little bit. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Switching gears now from the weather to the economic forecast amid the pandemic. Dr. Courtney Bir and team surveyed Oklahomans to see how they feel about the recovery efforts.
So the pulse survey was developed by a team of ag econ professors and extension specialists, and we really just wanted to get a feeling of what Oklahomans believed, how Oklahomans believed the economy was doing in respect to COVID-19. We had 796 respondents, and those people came from 71 of our 77 counties. So the top counties were Payne, Grady, Oklahoma, Muskogee, and Tulsa counties. So we had pretty good representation across the state. So we asked questions about the economy and then also questions regarding comfort level in group settings. So we're hoping to use this information to plan what we're going to do next in response to COVID-19. We also found out that 45% of respondents believed that we would be dealing with this COVID situation and that the worst of it wouldn't be over for another 10 months. So most people in Oklahoma believe that we'll be dealing with this COVID situation in the long run. And so that will help us develop some programming. And we actually found that 66% of respondents in rural areas were comfortable with having an in-person meeting of 10 or less people following social distancing rules. But when you look at the entire state of Oklahoma, that number drops down to 56%. So we're going to continue likely to follow CDC rules and to offer multiple ways to communicate with our people in Oklahoma, including online options for meetings and webinars. We have a publication with this information that's currently live online at the COVID website for OSU Extension. So go to OSU Extension, click on the COVID link, and it's there. It's also available as a current report. And again, we want to thank everyone for their participation. We're considering doing this sort of survey again in the future as things progress, and your participation will really be helpful in helping us make decisions to better serve you.
On the Cow-Calf Corner, we have talked about the importance of protein, energy, minerals for cattle, but arguably, perhaps the most important ingredient that cattle need is water, especially with the hot summer times that we have here in Oklahoma. A lot of different factors go into the water requirement of beef cattle, but for planning purposes, we have to boil this down to some pretty simple rules of thumb so that we can plan to make sure that there's enough water that's going to be available in waterers or in tanks that we might put out for a large number of cattle out in the pasture. The University of Georgia Extension specialists have done an excellent job of boiling this all down in one of their fact sheets and give us some rules of thumb to remember for the water requirements for beef cattle in the summertime. And they basically said this is what they're going to need on the average if the temperature is going to be 90 degrees or above during the daytime, which of course means most of summer here in Oklahoma. For dry cows, let's say those cows that are going to calve this fall, they need 1 gallon per 100 pounds of body weight in that situation, that 90-degree day in the summertime. If the cow is a spring calving cow, one that has a calf at side, then you need to double that to 2 gallons per 100 pounds of body weight. So let's use the example of 1,200-pound cows. That means if it's a dry cow, then she's going to need about 12 gallons of water per day. If it's a lactating cow, about 24 gallons of water per day here in the summertime. Bulls, of course, would be about the same as that dry cow. So if you have that 1-ton bull out there, you want to remember he needs about 20 gallons of water per head per day. Younger stock, it's a little bit different situation. It depends so much upon what their diet is. If it's a real dry diet, say dry hay and grain, then they need about that 2 gallons per 100 pounds of body weight. So if you've got, say, 600-pound stockers out there in a pen that's consuming a dry feed, they're going to need about 12 gallons of water per day. On the other side of the coin, let's say you have those same size stockers out on wheat pasture in the springtime when it's cool and that wheat pasture is lush, has very high moisture, and their water requirements are about half that, or only about 6 gallons per head per day. But I think if you'll remember that 1 gallon per 100 pounds of body weight for dry cows, 2 gallons of water per 100 pounds for that lactating cow, that'll go a long ways towards helping you plan your water needs during the summertime. And if you'd like to learn a little more about water requirements and water quality, I'm going to make a link in the show links for SUNUP to that Georgia Extension fact sheet. I think it's a really well written fact sheet that gives you a lot of really understandable details about water requirements for beef cattle. So go to the SUNUP website, that's sunup.okstate.edu, look under show links, and we'll have the link for that fact sheet there. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
We've made it to the halfway point of 2020, which was kind of a feat in itself, but Derrell, what do you see for markets in the second half?
Well, obviously the first half of this year was unlike anything we've ever seen or could have imagined.
We've been through a lot. The second half of the year will have some features, unfortunately, that will continue some of the same themes. Certainly some things will be different, and you know, and I think there's some reasons to be a little more optimistic in the second half. But obviously, you know, we're not done with this thing yet. There's a number of things still going on. The public health issues continue. We may be through the worst of it, hopefully, but we really don't know at this point. There's a lot of economic challenges ahead of us in the U.S. economy, the global economy, and so on. So, you know, there's some reasons to sort of think about a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but we clearly have some issues ahead of us yet.
We saw prices kind of climb up during the peak of the crisis on the protein side. Prices have kind of gone down a little bit. Is that going to be a trend more towards the normal cost of proteins?
I think so. You know, from a consumer standpoint, the protein sector should look a lot more normal a bit in terms of the supply and the overall price levels and so on in the second half of the year. Now, we could still have problems again. That would be some sort of resurgence of challenges, but I really don't think that'll happen. We've got some major macroeconomic challenges in the U.S. We've covered a lot of that with stimulus type money and unemployment benefits and so on. But as we work through those, if those run out, depending on whether we decide to continue them, all of those things will factor into sort of how beef demand plays relative to actually fairly abundant supplies of beef and other meats in the second half of the year.
March, February, April, cattle producers were kind of caught off guard whenever all of this happened. Do you see any bumps in the road moving forward for cattle producers?
Well, it depends on kind of on which market we look at. So, you know, the fed cattle market still has a lot of issues. We created a lot of backlog in the first half of the year. It's going to take, you know, much of the second half of the year, at least through the third quarter, to work through that. And that will in turn have some limitations, kind of a dark cloud hanging over feeder cattle markets as well, until we really get these feedlots flowing again in a more typical kind of sense. You know, there's one scenario where you could be pretty optimistic about calf prices by this fall. On the other hand, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think producers have to stay pretty cautious and just kind of see how the thing evolves over the next several weeks.
Earlier in your answer, you said a dark cloud. Are there any bright spots throughout the past 6 months?
Well, you know, there's you know, one thing I guess is that there's opportunity when there's volatility. Right. And so, you know, for cattle producers going forward, we've been through a lot. We're trying to recover from that. Most of that's kind of defensive in nature. We're back on our heels a little bit. But as we go forward, there will be some opportunities in this. And so, you know, and those will be different opportunities at different levels as time goes on. Again, more than likely with good, strong beef demand, perhaps after some rocky times ahead. And you know, internationally, that may be one of our brighter spots as we look towards the end of the year and into next year.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
The scuttlebutt with the farmers throughout the state is that they're concerned with the basis. So Kim, is there anything to be concerned with there?
Yeah, I think there's some concern on the basis. You know, is the basis being used to hurt the farmers? No. Is there collusion on the basis? No, I don't think so. But if you'll look at the Kansas City protein basis, you know, we talk a lot about that. This time last year for 11.2% protein wheat, which is about what we're going to have this year, it was $1.20. For 12-4 wheat is $1.55. That's a 35-cent premium for 12-4 over 11-2 wheat. This year, that 11-2 is 87 cents, 33 cents lower than it was last year. 12-4 protein was $1.25, 38 cents. So the spread between 11-2 and 12-4 is about the same for this year and last year, but this year's Kansas City basis, this year's export basis is 33 cents less than it was last year. And that means their cash price relative to the futures price is 33 cents less than last year. Yeah, that leaves some room for some concern, but it doesn't mean someone's taking advantage of you.
So how do we ease that concern and get that basis higher?
Well, one is understand what's going on. I think if you'll look at that 35-cent premium for 12-4 protein, the market's telling you they want protein. Also, this time last year, we had averaged about 11.4, a little bit higher, but we had protein in the bin that we could blend that up to get it up to the milling specifications. I think we've used all that protein wheat, and so they don't want that. Also, the market has taken carry out of it. That means this time last year, the market was paying the elevators 22 cents to store wheat from September to December. This year they're only paying them 11 cents. So you've got some reason there for a lower cash price. But you balance that futures and basis out, the cash price right now is within about 7 cents of what it was last year. What producers can do is, yes, be concerned about that low price, but ask the question is, how can I get a higher price for my wheat?
Well, the 2020 wheat crop is in the bin, and previously you've been talking about doing a third and a third and a third, but maybe altering those months. What should they do with their wheat now? Has anything changed?
Well, I don't think much has changed unless you go back, say, maybe 5 or 6 years when, well, really, you got to go back about 10 years for sell a third and harvest a third September, October, and the final third, Nov D, something like that. I think now you want to sell or market your wheat in June, July, and August. So I think they need to start staggering it in. They may also start looking at pricing some 21 wheat. Right now, you can forward contract that wheat for only $4.50. I don't think you should take that, but I think you've got to look out in the long term. Go ahead and move that wheat out this year. There's going to be some rallies. Sell on those rallies. Don't sell it all at once and stagger it into the market.
You mentioned 2021, so projecting out, even though getting out of this crazy year of 2020, what can we expect for prices in 2021?
Well, right now the market's telling us that it's going to be about the same as it is this year. I think in 2021, how to get a higher price is maintain that test rate. We had really good test weight. Is get some protein to sell next year. Right there's you 35 cents. You could probably pick up on it. And they're going to look at, well, maybe I should be planting something besides wheat, but corn, a long-term outlook for corn, $3.20 for corn, $8.20 for beans, 60 cents for cotton. All prices are low. So looking out to 2021, you've got to look at cost. How can I keep my costs low? How can I produce a quality product, test weight and protein, and then how can I merchandise that wheat on the market?
All righty, Kim. Dr. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We're talking now about blister beetles and how they impact horses with Dr. Kris Hiney, our Extension Equine Specialist. Kris, what are you hearing from horse owners around the state?
Well, we actually had a few calls recently from some unique circumstances where they were finding blister beetle swarms actually in their barn.
And that's pretty alarming. They must be worse this year maybe than in previous years?
Yeah, year to year, depending on environmental conditions, you can have bigger presence of the beetles. So probably some of the hotter weather that was happening drove the beetles inside, whereas normally we'd actually find them out in the fields.
Now, obviously, this is cause for concern because it can really hurt the horses and obviously be painful for people too.
Yeah, so blister beetles are extremely toxic for horses. And interestingly, depending on the species, it may vary by the amount of beetle that they eat. So even just a little bit of ingestion of a beetle can end up being lethal for a horse. And for people, if you accidentally kind of hit it on your shoulder or anything, it actually can blister or burn you as well.
So tell us a little bit more about what happens to the horses and what are some signs to keep in mind.
So the active ingredient, I guess, in a beetle is cantharidin, and essentially it's a blistering agent. So it will irritate all of the mucous membranes, essentially through the horse's GI tract and urinary tract. So you may see a horse that is acting colicky, like normal horse behavior, or normal colicky horse behavior, lethargic, they don't want to eat. You may see a horse actually like playing in the water, so they're thirsty, but their mouth hurts, so they're looks like they're dunking their head in the water more than they're actually drinking it. Because some of the irritation to the mucous membranes, you may see them looking like they're straining to urinate. So really look for abnormal behavior signs in your horse and try to think about what may actually be causing that.
And they would have ingested the blister beetle from their hay or grazing in the pasture?
Yeah, so normally we always warn people about alfalfa. Because of the purple flowers essentially in alfalfa, that's what attracts the beetles. However, any flowering plant or weed can be attractive for the beetles. In the case of the swarming beetles, if they had gotten into the feed troughs or in their water buckets, the horses might have just accidentally ingested them. So we do really need to be careful if we actually see an outbreak of these guys.
So in terms of control options, what kind of guidance do you have for horse owners?
So the biggest one is actually trying to eliminate weeds. So certainly not having a lot of flowering broadleaf weeds in the pasture, so weed control that way. Mechanical control, which essentially is mowing and weed eating, can help eliminate a lot of those weeds that attract the beetles to your property. So those are probably the biggest suggestions. If you do actually find that they're coming into the barn, then you have to use a premise spray and make sure that you're using products correctly. And certainly, if you ever have questions about any of that, contacting your county educator is a great first step.
How do I know that it's time to call the veterinarian? What is that window of time there to protect the animal?
So essentially it's a lot of supportive care for these horses after they've ingested beetles, but the quicker that you start treatment, the better. Again, this can be a lethal condition for horses, so really getting to know your horses, identifying abnormal behavior, and don't hesitate to call the veterinarian if you see any of those abnormal behaviors.
For people who want to learn more, there's an extension fact sheet available.
Yeah, it's actually titled Blister Beetles in Alfalfa, which is where we normally think about the beetles occurring, but it really covers everything that you need to know concerning these beetles.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Absolutely. And for a link to that fact sheet, go to sunup.okstate.edu. That'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.